History remembers her as a woman of ruthless ambition, a queen who brought down a king. Isabella of France, the she-wolf they called her. Her story is a tapestry of love and betrayal, of power and revenge. Born a princess, destined to be queen, Isabella's life was anything but a fairy tale. Her beauty was legendary, her spirit unyielding. Yet behind the crown and the finery lay a heart hardened by betrayal and a thirst for justice. Join us now, as we delve into the tumultuous life of Isabella of France, the she-wolf. Isabella was no ordinary woman. She was a princess of the Capetian dynasty, born into a world of power and privilege. Her marriage to Edward II of England was a strategic alliance, a union intended to bind two nations. Edward, a weak and indecisive king, was enthralled by his favourites, men who held more sway over him than his own queen. Isabella found herself cast aside, her counsel ignored, her pride wounded. Years of humiliation fueled a burning resentment, a desire for retribution. Isabella, once a dutiful wife, transformed into a formidable adversary, her heart set on revenge. The woman who had once loved Edward now plotted his downfall. Isabella's journey for justice was fraught with danger and intrigue. She found a powerful ally in Roger Mortimer, a man of ambition who shared her hatred for Edward and his favourites. Together, they ignited a rebellion that would shake the very foundations of the English monarchy. With Mortimer by her side, Isabella became a force to be reckoned with. The delicate princess had transformed into the Iron Queen, her resolve hardened in the fires of betrayal. Isabella's quest for vengeance would forever alter the course of English history. Born in the year 1295, Isabella was the daughter of Philip IV, a man known throughout Christendom as Philip the Fair. Isabella, his only surviving daughter, was the pearl of his court, her beauty as radiant as the sun. She was raised in the Palais de la Cité, on the Ile de la Cité, surrounded by the opulence and grandeur befitting her royal lineage. Tutored in the art of courtly life, she was schooled in languages, music, and the intricate steps of courtly dance. But beneath the surface of courtly refinement, Isabella possessed a will of iron, inherited from her formidable father. She observed the political machinations of her father's court, learning the subtle arts of diplomacy and the importance of power. Little did she know that these lessons would prove invaluable in the years to come. In the world of medieval politics, marriages were rarely matters of the heart. They were strategic alliances, carefully crafted to secure power, forge alliances, and expand kingdoms. So it was with Isabella. At the tender age of 12, she found herself betrothed to Edward, the heir to the English throne. The union was orchestrated by her father, Philip the Fair, who saw in England a valuable ally against his enemies, the Flemish. Edward I, the ageing King of England, was eager for the match, believing that a French alliance would bolster his own position. And so, in the grand cathedral of Boulogne, surrounded by the pomp and ceremony of two courts, Isabella, a princess of France, became the wife of Edward, the Prince of Wales. Isabella, young and innocent, arrived on English shores filled with hopes for a happy marriage. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Edward, handsome and charming, was a disappointment to his father. He preferred the company of musicians and actors to the battlefield and the council chamber. He surrounded himself with favourites, young men of no particular lineage, but who held his attention and affection in a way that Isabella, it seemed, could not. Their first meeting did little to inspire confidence. Edward, distracted and uninterested, barely spared a glance for his young bride. His gaze, Isabella noticed with growing unease, lingered on a young man by his side, a handsome Gascon knight named Piers Gaveston. Gaveston, witty and charming, held Edward in his thrall, and Isabella soon realised that she was wed not only to a king, but also to his favourite. The early years of their marriage were marked by a growing distance. Edward, preoccupied with Gaveston, paid her little heed. Isabella bore her humiliation in silence, her resentment simmering beneath the surface. She fulfilled her royal duty, providing Edward with heirs, 2 sons, and 2 daughters. But her heart remained untouched by the man she was bound to. Gaveston's shadow loomed large over their marriage, a constant reminder of her husband's indifference. The English barons, outraged by Gaveston's influence over Edward, demanded his exile. Edward, torn between his lover and his kingdom, reluctantly agreed. But Gaveston's exile was short-lived. Edward, unable to bear the separation, recalled his favourite, sparking a rebellion amongst the barons who saw Gaveston's return as a direct challenge to their authority. Isabella watched these events unfold with a mixture of apprehension and a strange sense of satisfaction. The seeds of rebellion, sown in the fertile ground of resentment, were beginning to sprout. The execution of Piers Gaveston did little to quell the unrest in Edward's court. The king, heartbroken and enraged by the barons' defiance, vowed revenge. Yet, even in his grief, Edward sought solace in the company of another, a young nobleman named Hugh Despenser. Despenser, ambitious and cunning, was everything that Gaveston had been and more. He quickly gained ascendancy over the pliable king, whispering poison in Edward's ear against the barons who had orchestrated Gaveston's demise. Edward, consumed by his thirst for vengeance, readily embraced Despenser's counsel, setting in motion a chain of events that would have devastating consequences. Isabella watched Despenser's rise with growing alarm. She recognized in him a dangerous manipulator, a man who sought to exploit Edward's weaknesses for his own gain. As Despenser's influence grew, so too did his audacity. He amassed lands and titles, enriching himself and his family at the expense of the barons, who watched their power diminish with each passing day. Isabella, once again relegated to the sidelines, found herself the target of Despenser's machinations. He poisoned Edward's mind against her, whispering lies about her loyalty and her alleged liaisons with other men. Edward, blinded by his infatuation with Despenser, believed these lies. He stripped Isabella of her lands and income, separating her from her children and placing her under virtual house arrest. Humiliated and enraged, Isabella realized the precariousness of her position. She was a queen in name only, stripped of her power, her dignity, and her children. In that moment of despair, a steely resolve hardened Isabella's heart. She would fight back, not just for herself, but for her children, her legacy, and the future of England. Isabella's opportunity for revenge presented itself in the form of a diplomatic mission. Charles IV, the new King of France and Isabella's brother, had become embroiled in a territorial dispute with Edward over Gascony, a region in southwestern France that had long been a source of contention between the two kingdoms. Edward, unwilling to travel to France himself, decided to send Isabella in his stead. It was a risky move, entrusting such a delicate negotiation to a queen who he had so publicly humiliated. But Edward, confident in Despenser's hold over him, saw little threat from Isabella. In the spring of 1325, Isabella set sail for France, accompanied by her eldest son, Prince Edward. It was a journey that would change the course of English history. Upon arriving in France, Isabella was greeted with open arms by her brother, Charles IV. She found solace in the familiar comforts of the French court, surrounded by the warmth and affection that had been so lacking in England. Yet, Isabella had not returned to France merely to seek refuge. It was during this time that Isabella encountered Roger Mortimer, a powerful English baron who had been imprisoned by Edward II for his opposition to the Despensers. Mortimer, a man of ambition and charisma, had escaped from the Tower of London and fled to France, where he sought support for his own vendetta against the king. Isabella recognized in Mortimer a kindred spirit, a man who shared her hatred for Edward and the Despensers. Together, Isabella and Mortimer forged an alliance, bound by their shared desire for revenge and fueled by their growing affection for one another. Isabella of France, once the demure Queen of England, now blazed with the fire of a woman scorned. Exiled in her brother's court, she was no longer content to be a mere spectator in the drama of her life. Roger Mortimer, the banished baron, became her confidant, her lover, and her weapon in the fight against Edward II. Mortimer, a man of cunning and ambition, saw in Isabella a powerful ally. He fueled her anger, whispering tales of Edward's tyranny and the Despenser's grip on the throne. Their affair, a scandal whispered in hushed tones throughout the courts of Europe, became a symbol of their defiance. Isabella, embracing the role of the wronged woman, used her position to rally support for her cause. Across the English Channel, discontent festered. Edward II, blind to the storm brewing across the sea, remained under the sway of Hugh Despenser the Younger. The barons, stripped of their power and wealth, watched with growing resentment as Despenser tightened his grip on the kingdom. Isabella, through Mortimer's network of spies, kept abreast of the unrest in England. She knew the time was ripe to strike. Clandestine messages, carried by loyal messengers, flowed between France and England, weaving a tapestry of rebellion. Isabella, a master strategist, understood the power of propaganda. In the autumn of 1326, Isabella, with Mortimer by her side, launched her daring invasion of England. Their forces, though small, were bolstered by the promise of support from within England itself. The Queen, once dismissed as a mere woman, had become a beacon of hope for those yearning for change. The invasion took Edward II and his court by surprise. They had underestimated Isabella's resolve and the depth of her support. As Isabella's forces swept across the English countryside, the people flocked to her banner, eager to overthrow the king who had failed them. Edward, panicked and indecisive, fled London with Despenser, seeking refuge in the west. The net closed in on Edward II and Despenser in a remote castle in Wales. Isabella, her army swelled by the disgruntled masses, laid siege to the castle, trapping the king and his hated favourite. The once mighty Edward, reduced to a hunted animal, faced the full fury of his scorned wife. The siege was short-lived. Despenser, reviled by the people, was captured and brutally executed, his death a gruesome spectacle that served as a warning to those who dared defy the Queen. Edward, abandoned and alone, had no choice but to surrender to the woman he had so deeply wronged. Isabella, triumphant yet heartbroken, ordered Edward's imprisonment. Isabella, now the effective ruler of England, had achieved her goal. Edward II, deposed and imprisoned, was no longer a threat, but her victory was bittersweet. The throne she had fought so hard to reclaim would not be hers to rule. Her son, the young Prince Edward, was crowned Edward III, with Isabella as his regent. Mortimer, his ambition burning brighter than ever, stood by Isabella's side, his influence over her absolute. Their relationship, once a source of strength, had become a tangled web of love, power, and suspicion. Isabella had vanquished her enemies, but her trials were far from over. With Edward II deposed, and her young son, Edward III, crowned king, Isabella of France found herself as the power behind the throne. As regent, she held the reins of England's destiny, a responsibility she embraced with the same fierce determination that had fueled her quest for vengeance. The court, once cowed by Edward II's favourites, now bowed before Isabella. Her word was law, her judgments final. The Queen, once humiliated and marginalised, had become the most powerful figure in the realm. Yet even as she savoured her triumph, Isabella knew that her position was precarious. Enemies, both old and new, lurked in the shadows, eager to exploit any weakness, any misstep. The deposed Edward II, imprisoned in Berkeley Castle, remained a potent symbol of her past transgressions. And then there was Mortimer, her lover and co-conspirator, his ambition growing with each passing day. Roger Mortimer, the exiled baron who had returned to England by Isabella's side, was a man of insatiable ambition. He had helped orchestrate Edward II's downfall, and now, with Isabella as regent, he saw his opportunity to seize the ultimate prize, the throne itself. Mortimer, using his charm and cunning, tightened his grip on Isabella. He became her closest advisor, her confidant, her lover. His influence over her was absolute, and through her he ruled England. Titles were bestowed, lands granted, and fortunes made and unmade at his whim. The court, witnessing Mortimer's growing power, whispered of their queen's infatuation, of her blindness to the danger he posed. But Isabella, consumed by her love for Mortimer and her own thirst for power, ignored the warnings. She had tasted vengeance, and now she craved the intoxicating elixir of absolute control. As Mortimer's power grew, so too did the whispers of discontent. The barons, once united in their hatred for Edward II and the Despensers, now chafed under Mortimer's iron rule. They saw him for what he was, a usurper, a man who had used Isabella's love and ambition to further his own agenda. Even Isabella, blinded by love as she was, began to see glimpses of Mortimer's true nature. His ambition was boundless, his ruthlessness chilling. He had disposed of one king. What would stop him from disposing of another, even if that king was her son, Edward III? The seeds of doubt, once sown, took root in Isabella's heart, growing into a tangled thicket of fear and suspicion. The love she had once felt for Mortimer began to curdle, replaced by a growing sense of unease. She had unleashed a force she could no longer control, a realization that filled her with a chilling dread. The turning point came with the suspicious death of Edmund, Earl of Kent, Isabella's brother-in-law. Edmund, loyal to the deposed Edward II, had become a thorn in Mortimer's side. His sudden demise, whispered to be Mortimer's doing, sent shockwaves through the court. Isabella, confronted with the growing evidence of Mortimer's treachery, was forced to confront the truth. The man she had loved, the man she had raised to power, was a viper, poised to strike at the heart of her own family. Fueled by a mother's love and a queen's fury, Isabella resolved to act. She had been a pawn in Mortimer's game for too long. Now, she would become the player, orchestrating his downfall with the same cunning and ruthlessness that he had taught her. The she-wolf, awakened from her slumber, was ready to reclaim her place as the protector of her son and the rightful ruler of England. Isabella of France's story is a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. A queen betrayed, she rose from the ashes of her humiliation to orchestrate the downfall of a king, only to find herself entangled with a man even more ambitious and ruthless than the one she had deposed. Her legacy, forever intertwined with the shadows of Edward II's tragic end and Mortimer's brief, tyrannical reign, remains a subject of intense debate amongst historians. Was she a cold-hearted schemer, driven by a lust for power and vengeance, or a victim of circumstance, a woman pushed to the brink by the betrayals of the men she had loved? The chronicles of her time, often penned by those who benefited from her downfall, paint a picture of a scheming seductress, a she-wolf who preyed on the weaknesses of men. Yet to dismiss Isabella as a mere villain is to ignore the complexities of her character and the tumultuous times in which she lived. She was a product of her age, an age where power was a game played with the highest of stakes, and women were often relegated to the sidelines. Isabella refused to be sidelined. She fought for her rights, her children, and her place in history, even if it meant resorting to desperate measures.